Right now, without even thinking about it, you probably know roughly how much is sitting in your bank account. A few taps on your phone, maybe Face ID, maybe a PIN, and there it is. Your balance, your security, the number that tells you everything is fine. In early 2026, the median American household earns around $76,000 to $88,000 a year. The average full-time worker takes home roughly $1,214 a week. Those are real numbers, backed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And for most people, those numbers feel like power, like freedom, like a fortress. But here's what no one in the financial system wants you to ask out loud. What is that number actually backed by? Not gold. The U.S. abandoned that in 1971, not silver, not land. What backs the purchasing power of every dollar in your account, every paycheck deposited, every savings balance you've carefully built, is something far more fragile and far more physical? It's oil, not metaphorically, literally. The dollar is, at its core, a claim on energy. And for over a century, the engine of all human civilization has run on one fuel above all others, petroleum. Welcome to the Elite Code, where we strip away the comfortable fictions and look at the raw architecture of power. Today's question: if the global oil supply was cut off for 90 days, what would your paycheck actually buy? The answer will change how you see money forever. We like to think of ourselves as the energy superpower, and in some ways, we are. The United States entered 2026 as the world's largest oil producer, pumping a record 13.6 million barrels per day. Energy dominance has been the rallying cry of multiple administrations. But here's the number that shatters that illusion. The United States consumes approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day. We produce 13.6 million. We consume 20 million. Do the math. We import the difference, roughly 6 to 8 million barrels every single day, from Canada, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and a web of geopolitical relationships held together with petrodollars and diplomatic pressure. Now, you might be thinking, but we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We have a backup, and you're right, we do. The SPR, stored in massive underground salt caverns in Louisiana and Texas, held approximately 415 million barrels as of early 2026. The Department of Energy describes this as roughly 125 days of import protection under normal conditions. That sounds like a lot, until you understand what normal conditions actually means. The SPR's maximum physical drawdown rate is 4.4 million barrels per day. Meanwhile, the gap between what we produce and what we consume is much larger than that. In a true total supply disruption, not a partial squeeze, but a full severing, the SPR cannot fill the void. It can slow the bleeding. It cannot stop it. And here is the detail that should keep you up at night. The SPR was already dramatically weakened. The Biden administration drew down 180 million barrels in 2022. The Trump administration began refilling it, but as of early 2026, the reserve sat at only about 58% of its full capacity. We are running a critical national security asset at well below full strength, heading into the most volatile geopolitical era since World War II. Now let's talk about where the real vulnerability sits, not in Texas salt caverns, but in a narrow strip of water on the other side of the world. Pull up a map. Find Iran. Find Oman. Between them, where the Persian Gulf narrows to a bottleneck barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point, that is the Strait of Hormuz. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through this strait. That is roughly 20% of all global liquid petroleum consumption, and 38% of all seaborne oil trade. Saudi crude, Emirati crude, Kuwaiti crude, Iraqi crude. All of it must funnel through this one choke point to reach the markets of Europe, Asia, and the Americas. But oil isn't the only thing at stake. Here's what most coverage misses. 29% of the world's LPG liquefied petroleum gas, what heats American homes and powers industrial facilities, moves through Hormuz. 19% of global LNG, liquefied natural gas, the fuel powering an increasing share of America's electricity grid, passes through here. And the fertilizer giants of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Iran, export nearly 49% of the world's urea and roughly 30% of global ammonia through these same waters. A closure of Hormuz doesn't just mean your gas tank goes empty. It means the electrical grid in parts of this country starts to buckle. It means the fertilizer supply to American farms, which, like farms everywhere, are utterly dependent on synthetic nitrogen, begins to collapse. And it means a chemical process called Haber-Bosch, the early 20th century invention that allowed humanity to synthesize nitrogen fertilizer from natural gas, starts to choke. Here's the terrifying truth about Haber-Bosch. This single industrial process is estimated to directly sustain the lives of roughly 4 billion people on Earth. Without synthetic fertilizer, global grain output would plummet by half. According to researcher Vaclav Smil, half. You don't just eat food. In the modern industrial food system, you eat oil and natural gas that have been chemically transformed into calories. Studies in agricultural ecology show that for every single calorie of food energy your body receives, the industrial food system expends approximately 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce, process, and deliver it. Your grocery cart is a fossil fuel receipt. You just never see the itemized bill. Let's now do something the mainstream financial media won't. Let's walk through what actually happens, week by week, when the oil stops flowing. Not as a thought experiment, as a forensic simulation grounded in how supply chains, behavioral economics, and historical crises actually work. We'll track the purchasing power of a median American wage, approximately $1,214 per week, or roughly $5,260 a month, against the reality unfolding around it. Days 1 through 7, the shock and the sprint, the news breaks. A major geopolitical event, a military strike, a naval blockade, a cascading sanctions regime, has effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The White House holds an emergency press conference. Markets open down 8% before circuit breakers halt trading. The first thing that happens is not a shortage. It's panic. Americans have seen crisis before. COVID-19 cleared grocery shelves of toilet paper within 48 hours. The 2000 UK fuel crisis, just a trucker protest, not an actual supply cut, emptied British supermarket shelves within 96 hours because the country's just-in-time inventory system held only 3 days of food stock in most distribution hubs. America's grocery system runs on the exact same model. Within the first 48 hours, gas stations see lines stretching multiple blocks. Prices surge to $6, $7, $8 per gallon in panic buying. Wholesale club stores, Costco, Sam's Club implement purchase limits on water, rice, canned goods, and batteries. ATMs run dry in some areas as people pull cash, uncertain whether digital systems will remain stable. Amazon's delivery estimates stretch from 2 days to 1 to 2 weeks as logistics companies begin charging fuel allocation. Your paycheck still hitting your account on schedule, but the goods you'd normally buy with it, up 20 to 40% in price by the end of the first week, and disappearing fast from shelves. The people who acted in the first 24 hours, who filled their gas tanks, restocked their pantries, preserved their purchasing power. Those who waited even 3 days found themselves bidding against panic at 3 times normal prices on secondary markets. A week of groceries for a family of 4 that normally costs $200 now costs $280 to $320 if you can find everything on the list. By the end of the second week, the panic buying surge has cleared most retail inventory. Now the structural reality sets in. The supply chain cannot refill itself at normal speed because transport costs have exploded. Trucking is the circulatory system of the American economy. Every single item in every store across this country, every apple, every t-shirt, Every box of Advil arrived on a diesel-powered truck. Diesel is not gasoline. You cannot substitute it. The American trucking fleet runs on diesel, and diesel supply is now being rationed and prioritized for essential categories. The federal government invokes the Defense Production Act. Fuel is designated a strategic resource. Agriculture and hospitals get first priority. Consumer goods and retail get whatever's left. What this means for your paycheck: gasoline prices in unprotected markets now $9 to $12 per gallon in high-demand states like California and New York. Grocery prices on perishables, meat, dairy, fresh produce, have spiked 60 to 90% because refrigerated trucking is now rationed. Restaurant supply chains are fracturing. Food service operators begin closing locations, not because of lack of demand, but because they cannot get ingredients delivered reliably. Airlines begin canceling routes. Jet fuel is being diverted to military contracts. One paycheck, that $1,214, that once comfortably covered a week of living, now barely covers the elevated cost of food alone for a family of four. The dollar hasn't been devalued by the Fed has done nothing. But the real purchasing power of your savings is evaporating because the physical goods those dollars claim have become scarcer and harder to move. This is not inflation in the textbook sense. This is supply destruction, and it is far more dangerous. Here is where an economic phenomenon called wage stickiness begins to destroy the middle class. Your labor contract, whether you're a nurse, an accountant, a teacher, a software engineer, was negotiated months or years ago. It reflects the economic reality of then, not now. Wages are slow. They adjust quarterly, annually, contractually. Prices, however, especially in a supply crisis, adjust by the hour. By the end of the first month, the CPI is running at an annualized rate somewhere between 40 and 80%, depending on the category. Energy and food are leading the surge. Your nominal paycheck is the same. Your real purchasing power has dropped by an estimated 25 to 35% from day one. The stock market has lost 30 to 40% of its value. Your 401k has been halved, at least on paper. Credit card companies begin tightening limits as default risk models explode. Some banks quietly pause home equity lines of credit. Meanwhile, a two-tier economy emerges in real time. Americans who own hard assets, land, farmland, physical gold and silver, paid-off property, stored food, income-producing real estate, are watching their relative wealth increase as paper-based wealth collapses. The farmer in rural Kansas who owns 200 acres and has a barn full of harvested grain is now, by any practical measure, the wealthiest person in his county. Not the $200,000 a year tech manager in the suburban house with 2 car payments and a Robinhood portfolio. The dollar amount in your brokerage account means increasingly less. What matters now is, can this number be converted into something physical, and at what cost? Gold, which was trading around $2,800 per ounce in early 2026, begins its vertical climb, not because gold suddenly became more useful, but because every other store of value is being questioned. At the 1-month mark, the crisis enters its most dangerous phase, not because of direct fuel shortage, but because of second and third-order consequences rippling through interconnected systems. The agricultural cliff. American agriculture runs on a precise seasonal clock. Planting windows open in spring, miss them, and you've missed the harvest. By day 30 to 45, farmers who cannot get diesel for their tractors, irrigation pumps, and grain dryers are making agonizing decisions. Some choose not to plant, some planted but cannot irrigate. The harvest 6 months away is already being reduced, not by drought, but by fuel rationing. Simultaneously, the fertilizer supply pipeline, much of which originates from or transits through the Persian Gulf, is disrupted. The United States does have domestic fertilizer production, but it is not sufficient to cover full demand. Urea prices triple. ammonia prices quadruple. Farmers who cannot afford inputs begin fallowing fields, the grid under pressure. Natural gas powers roughly 40% of American electricity generation. While most U.S. natural gas is domestically produced and delivered by pipeline, and is therefore immune to maritime disruption, the price of all energy is now globally linked. Natural gas prices spike in sympathy with global LNG market chaos. Electricity rates surge 40 to 70%. For working class and middle class Americans, this is catastrophic. Heating and cooling bills double or triple. Utility shutoff spike. In states where summer temperatures regularly hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, power grid stress events become life-threatening. The banking system trembles. This is the scenario that haunts the Federal Reserve and Treasury Department above all others. As prices spiral, consumer confidence collapses. Household debt defaults begin rising sharply. Banks, whose loan portfolios are heavily tied to auto loans, commercial real estate, and consumer credit, begin showing stress. The FDIC guarantee of $250,000 per depositor still nominally exists, but the question that starts circulating online and in neighborhood group chats is, if the bank fails, how quickly can you actually access your money? In 2008, bank runs were slow because information traveled slowly. In 2026, a single viral post can trigger a digital bank run in 40 minutes. The Fed knows this. Emergency measures, withdrawal limits, transaction freezes on large withdrawals become politically imaginable in ways they weren't before. Your paycheck at day 60, in nominal dollars, unchanged, in real purchasing power, down approximately 45 to 60% from where you started on day one. In terms of food security, a monthly salary that once bought for weeks of comfortable groceries now buys perhaps 2 weeks of basics, and you are competing with millions of other Americans for those same basics. The final phase of a 90-day oil drought is not primarily a logistics crisis. It is a psychological and monetary crisis. Human beings can tolerate scarcity. What they cannot tolerate is uncertainty about whether things will ever return to normal. At day 60, that uncertainty crosses a threshold. Flight from currency, the phenomenon where people try to rid themselves of depreciating money and convert it into anything physical, begins in earnest. This has happened before, in identifiable historical patterns. In the 1973 oil embargo, the United States experienced years of stagflation, simultaneous stagnation and inflation, precisely because an energy price shock destroyed the relationship between wages and purchasing power. In Venezuela, when oil revenues collapsed after mismanagement, the bolivar entered hyperinflationary spiral. Physical paper currency was discarded on the street because its face value was less than the paper it was printed on. In Zimbabwe in 2008, hyperinflation reached 500 billion%. People carried cash in wheelbarrows to buy bread. The United States is the world's reserve currency. The dollar has unique structural defenses that Venezuela and Zimbabwe lacked. The Fed can intervene in ways smaller central banks cannot. But here's what the dollar cannot do. It cannot conjure diesel fuel. It cannot manufacture fertilizer. It cannot move a 40,000-pound load of food on a highway that has no diesel trucks running. By day 70 through 90, barter economies emerge in communities, particularly in rural and semi-rural areas. A cord of firewood, a case of canned goods, a bottle of antibiotics, a kilowatt-hour of solar electricity. These become the actual transactional units of survival. The government has likely invoked some form of rationing system, possibly digital, linked to social security numbers or real ID, a baseline caloric allocation, distributed to prevent mass starvation in urban centers. The geographic hierarchy of American power inverts. Manhattan, which in normal times is the financial capital of the world, is now a death trap. It imports 100% of its food. Its high-rises require elevators, which require electricity. It has no farmland, no wells, no wood to burn. Meanwhile, the farmer in Iowa, the rancher in Montana, the family in rural Tennessee with a garden, a well, and a wood stove. These people are the new landed gentry. They control calories, and calories are the only currency that will never hyperinflate. By day 90, your paycheck, that $1,214 a week, that tidy number on your direct deposit confirmation, retains perhaps 10 to 20 cents of purchasing power for every dollar it represented on day one, on anything that matters for biological survival. It is not that the number changed, it's that the world the number was denominated in has been revealed as a fiction. The dollar was always just a proxy for energy. Now that the energy is gone, the proxy has nothing left to proxy. Here is the philosophical heart of everything we've discussed. The US dollar's global dominance, the fact that oil is priced in dollars worldwide, that central banks hold dollar reserves, that dollar hegemony has been the cornerstone of American geopolitical power since 1945, is not an accident of history. It is not a testament to American virtue. It is, at its foundation, a petrodollar arrangement. After the Bretton Woods gold standard collapsed in 1971, the Nixon administration struck a deal with Saudi Arabia in 1973 and 1974. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil sales exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the US would provide military protection and weapons. The rest of OPEC followed. The result? Every nation on earth that wanted to buy oil had to first acquire US dollars. This created permanent structural demand for the dollar, allowing the United States to run deficits that would have destroyed any other currency. The dollar is not backed by gold, the dollar is backed by oil. Not American oil, global oil. The arrangement that forces the entire world to transact in dollars for the world's most critical commodity. This is why a Hormuz closure doesn't just raise gas prices. It attacks the root system of dollar credibility itself. If the world can no longer trust the free flow of oil through dollar-denominated supply chains, the question becomes, why hold dollars at all? Understanding this architecture is not cause for despair. It is cause for intelligent preparation. The 90-day scenario is extreme, but partial versions of this crisis, 20-day disruptions, 40% oil price spikes, localized supply chain failures, happen with historical regularity. The 1973 embargo, the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War, the 2005 hurricane season, the 2022 Ukraine shock. Each time, the people who were devastated were those who held their entire net worth in paper claims with no physical backstop. Each time, the people who preserved their wealth had converted some portion of those paper claims into hard stores of value before the crisis erupted. That means physical assets, land, gold, silver, things that exist outside a server, energy independence, even partial solar generation, a fuel supply cache, anything that reduces your dependency on the grid, food security, a well-stocked pantry, knowledge of local food sources, a garden if possible. These are not prepper novelties. They are rational portfolio diversification. Community networks, the single most overlooked survival asset. People who know a farmer, a mechanic, a nurse, a butcher, people embedded in real local webs of reciprocity, fare better in every documented crisis than isolated high-income individuals. Skills with physical value, carpentry, plumbing, medicine, animal husbandry, food preservation. In the scenario above, the person who can fix a diesel engine or deliver a baby in a blackout is wealthier than any fund manager. None of this requires believing civilization is about to end. It requires only acknowledging one thing. The prosperity of the last century was not built on the genius of financial systems. It was built on the availability of cheap, dense, portable energy, stored in geological time and extracted in industrial quantities. Every number in your bank account is downstream of that fact. The civilization we inhabit is extraordinary. It is also dancing on a razor's edge, one that the average person has never seen, because the systems that maintain the illusion are very, very good at what they do, until they aren't. Look at your phone again. Look at that number. Now ask yourself, what is that number actually backed by? If the answer is the continued, uninterrupted flow of 20 million barrels of oil per day through a global supply chain that passes through a 21-mile-wide strait in the Middle East, then you understand something about power that most people will spend their entire lives not knowing. The dollar is not a fortress. It is a very sophisticated one denominated not in gold, not in land, but in black liquid pulled from deep underground and burned, perpetually, to keep the engines of civilization running. When the oil stops, the IOU has nothing to promise. Don't wait for the 90 days to find out. If this analysis opened your eyes to a truth the system prefers you not examine, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like, subscribe to the Elite Code, and stay with us as we continue to decode the hidden architecture of global power. See you in the next one.